The night was quiet, but her heart was loud with pain. She stood at the edge of the alien outpost, staring at the stars as if they had betrayed her. Only a few days ago, her partner had been alive, strong, and by her side. Now he was gone, burned, in the fire of war, and nothing could bring him back. Her name was Liara, a warrior from a proud alien clan. She had always believed her people were stronger than humans, wiser than humans, and braver than humans. Her partner had proved it again and again, his blade shining against enemies, his courage unshaken. But when the enemy came with firestorms, even he could not survive. Liara clenched her fists, her sharp claws digging into her palm. She wanted to scream, but her voice was trapped inside her chest. She wanted to fight, but there was no one left to strike. The War Council gave her no time to grieve, no time to heal. Instead, they assigned her a new partner, a human. The moment she heard the words, her blood boiled. How dare they, how could they expect her to accept a stranger, and worse, a human? Her people said humans were reckless, weak, and filled with too much heart. They were not meant for war, not meant for the shadows. But now one of them was supposed to stand where her partner once stood. She turned when she heard footsteps behind her. It was him, the human. He walked with a steady pace, not too fast, not too slow. He stopped a few feet away and did not speak. His eyes met hers, calm but heavy. Liara hated that look. It was not fear, not arrogance, just understanding. She did not want his understanding. "You are not him," Liara growled, her voice cold as steel. The human nodded slowly. "I know," he answered. Those two words only made her angrier. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He just accepted it. She turned away, refusing to look at him again. That night, when orders came for their first patrol together, Liara almost refused, but she was bound by duty. Her people's honor meant more than her rage. So she walked beside him into the dark forest outside the outpost. The trees whispered in the wind, shadows crawling along the ground. Her senses stayed sharp, her weapon ready. Yet she felt the heavy presence of the human at her side. Silent, watchful, too close. She tried to ignore him, but her grief made her restless. Her anger made her careless. When the first sound of movement came, Liara spun too quickly. Her weapon struck stone, sparks flew. From the darkness, an enemy scout lunged. Liara braced herself, but before she could strike again, the human moved. His blade cut through the air, blocking the attack aimed at her neck. The enemy hissed, retreating into the shadows. The human did not chase. He stood firm, one arm out in front of her, keeping her safe. Liara froze, her breath caught in her throat. Why would he do that? Her claws shook as she pushed his arm away. "I don't need your protection," she snapped. The human only looked at her, his face unreadable. He said nothing, and that silence angered her more than words ever could. As they returned to the outpost, the night stretched long and bitter. Liara's heart was still broken, and now it carried fresh confusion. She hated him for being there, for standing in the place her partner once stood. But she could not erase the image of his blade, stopping the attack that would have ended her life. The memory pressed against her grief, leaving a question she refused to ask. Who was this human, really? And why did he not let her die? The shadows of loss still followed her. But now another shadow walked beside her, one she could not escape, one she did not yet understand. Morning came with the sound of the War Council's horns. The outpost walls shook as orders spread through the camp. Liara stood tall among her people, her claws flexing at her side. Her eyes burned with anger when she saw the human standing near the council fire. His name was David. She had learned the night before. A plain name, too soft for a warrior's tongue. The council leader spoke with authority, his voice echoing. "From this day, Liara and David will serve as one unit," he declared. "They will patrol together, fight together, and live together until the war ends." The words struck her like chains. Liara felt trapped. Her grief twisting into fury, she wanted to shout, to refuse. But honor bound her. If she broke tradition, her people would see her as weak, and weakness was death. When the meeting ended, David approached, His steps steady, his shoulders carrying the weight of silence, Liara glared at him, her voice sharp as a blade. "Do not think this makes you my partner," she hissed. He nodded once, calm, unshaken. "I don't," he answered. That calmness was unbearable. Why did he never fight back? Why did he always accept her hatred without a word? Their orders came quickly. An enemy supply caravan had been spotted near the canyon pass. Liara and David were sent to scout and, if possible, destroy it. The journey through the canyon was quiet, the air heavy with tension. Dust clung to their armor, rocks shifted underfoot. Liara kept her eyes forward, pretending David wasn't there, but she could feel him watching the shadows, always alert, always ready. When they reached the ridge, Liara spotted movement below. The enemy convoy was larger than expected. Armored beasts dragging carts, soldiers marching with weapons ready. It was too much for 2 fighters alone. "We cannot fight." "This," Liara whispered, her voice bitter. David studied the enemy for a long moment, then shook his head. "No," he agreed, "but we can slow them." Before she could answer, he began setting traps with quiet skill, using wires, explosives, and rocks. He moved with precision. Liara frowned as she watched. This was not the clumsy human she expected. Every move was careful, every plan measured. Against her will, she felt a flicker of respect. But she crushed it quickly. When the convoy reached the choke point, chaos erupted. Explosives lit the canyon walls. Rocks thundered down. The beasts panicked. Soldiers scattered. Liara leapt into the fight, her claws slicing through the enemy. David fought beside her, his blade fast, his strikes clean. For the first time they moved as one. His blade blocked where her guard was open, her claws struck where his reach was short. Together they cut through the enemy lines. But victory came at a cost. A hidden archer loosed an arrow, aimed straight. For Liara's heart, she turned too late, her eyes wide, but the arrow never reached her. David had stepped in front, his arm catching the shaft, blood running down his armor. Liara froze, her chest burning with shock. Why would he do this again? Why would a human risk himself for her? "Keep fighting," he said through gritted teeth, pulling the arrow free. Then he pushed forward, striking down 2 more enemies with fierce determination. Liara's anger melted into confusion. Her claws moved on instinct, her heart pounding for a reason she did not understand. When the last enemy fell and silence filled the canyon, she turned to him. His arm was bleeding, but his face remained steady. He looked at her with the same calm eyes as before, as if saving her was the only choice, as if her life mattered more than his own. Liara's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but no words came. She hated him. She told herself that again and again. Yet when she saw the blood on his armor, hatred felt empty. Instead, something else stirred in the shadows of her heart. Something dangerous. Something she did not want to name. On the way back to the outpost, the silence between them was different. It was no longer filled with hatred. It was filled with questions she refused to ask and answers she was afraid to hear. The council praised their success, but Liara barely listened. Her eyes kept drifting to the human, to the wound he carried for her, to the steady strength she did not want to see. She told herself she would never trust him, never forgive him. But deep inside, the walls of her hatred were beginning to crack, and once they cracked, nothing would ever be the same again. Days turned into nights and missions kept pulling them together. Liara still told herself she hated the human, but the truth was no longer simple. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him stepping in front of her, taking the arrow meant for her chest. Every time she touched her weapon, she remembered his blade clashing against the enemy's steel to guard her. She wanted to forget, but the memories clung to her heart like vines, refusing to let go. Around the outpost, whispers spread. Her people noticed how she no longer snarled at the human the way she once did. Some mocked her, others warned her. "Be careful, Liara. Humans are dangerous." But the most painful whispers were those that said she had already replaced her fallen partner. Liara's claws dug into her palms each time she heard those words. "No one can replace him," she growled to herself. "No one, David never answered the whispers, never spoke against her. He simply kept working, sharpening his blade, fixing gear, tending wounds. Sometimes she caught him watching the stars, his face calm but heavy. It made her wonder what memories he carried, what ghosts followed him the way her partner's ghost followed her. One night, rain poured over the outpost. The barracks roof leaked, dripping cold water onto the floor. Liara sat alone in the corner, sharpening her claws on a whetstone. The sound of steel on stone filled the silence. Then David entered, carrying a small bundle of rations. Without a word, he placed half of it near her. "I don't need your pity," she snapped, glaring at him. "It's not pity," he replied quietly. "It's just food." She almost threw it back. But her stomach betrayed her. Hunger growled, and against her pride, she took a bite. The bread was rough, the taste bitter, but it was warm. For a moment, the cold inside her chest eased. She hated that he could do that with something so simple. The next morning, they were sent on another patrol. The path wound through ruined villages where broken walls and burned homes told silent stories. Liara walked ahead, her steps heavy. David followed. Scanning the shadows, suddenly a faint cry echoed from one of the ruined houses. Both froze, their weapons ready. Liara's ears twitched, sharp with alien hearing. "It's a child," she whispered. Inside the rubble, a small alien boy was trapped beneath fallen beams. His skin was pale, his breath shallow. Without waiting, Liara rushed forward, pushing at the heavy wood. Her claws scraped but could not move it alone. David stepped beside her, his hands gripping the beam. Together they heaved, stone grinding against stone. With one last push, the beam lifted and Liara pulled the child free. The boy clung to her, weak but alive. Liara's heart ached as memories of her partner surged inside her. He had always dreamed of children, of a family after the war. Tears burned her eyes, but she hid them quickly. David tore strips from his own tunic, binding the child's wounds. His hands were steady, his voice calm as he whispered comfort. Liara watched in silence, her anger twisting into something softer. How could a human show such care for a child not his own? They carried the boy back to the outpost. The healers took him in, and the child survived. That night, Liara stood outside, the rain washing the dirt from her armor. David joined her, silent as always. Finally, she asked the question that haunted her. "Why do you do this?" she said, her voice low. "Why protect me? Why save children that are not yours? Why risk yourself at all?" David's eyes lifted. To the sky, his voice quiet but steady. "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything," he said. Liara's breath caught. He did not explain further, but the weight of his words struck her. He carried ghosts too, ghosts she could not see, and suddenly, she realized she was not the only one living in the shadow of loss. She turned away quickly, afraid he might see the crack forming in her armor. Her hatred was no longer solid. It was breaking piece by piece. Every act of kindness, every quiet sacrifice, every calm word, they were breaking through the wall she had built around her heart. As she lay down that night, the whispers of the outpost returned. "They fight together now," some said. "Maybe she trusts him," others whispered. Liara closed her eyes, her chest tight with denial. "No," she told herself. "I don't trust him." But in the deepest part of her heart, she knew the truth. The wall was cracking, and once it broke, nothing could stop what would come next. The ruins stretched before them like the bones of a dead world. Broken towers leaned against the sky, their shadows long and sharp. The council had sent Liara and David to search the old city, where whispers said the enemy hid weapons. Liara's claws itched as she stepped into the silence, her eyes scanning. Every dark corner, David walked beside her, steady as always, his hand never far from his blade. The air was heavy, filled with dust and old memories. Each step echoed, as if the ruins themselves were watching them. Liara's heart pounded with unease. Something about the place felt wrong. Too still, too quiet, like the breath before a storm. "This place is dead," Liara muttered. David shook his head slowly. No, he said. It's waiting. His voice was calm, but his eyes searched the shadows with sharp focus. Liara hated to admit it, but his instincts often proved right. They moved deeper into the ruins, past cracked statues and shattered streets. The air grew colder, the silence heavier. Then Liara froze, her ears twitching at a faint click beneath her foot. Her eyes widened. A trap. The ground shifted with a roar. Stone walls collapsed around them. Ceiling exits, hidden machinery whirred to life, releasing clouds of smoke. Figures emerged from the mist. Enemy soldiers, armored and armed. Liara's claws flashed as she leapt forward. Striking the first attacker, David blocked another's blade with his own. Sparks flying in the darkness, the fight was brutal. Enemies came from every side, their weapons flashing, their roars echoing through the ruins. Liara's rage exploded, every strike fueled by grief. She tore through soldiers with wild power, but even she could not fight them all. A heavy blow struck her side, sending her crashing into a broken pillar. Dust filled her lungs as she struggled to rise. Through the haze, she saw an enemy blade descending toward her chest. But then, David was there. His sword clashed against the enemy's. Knocking it aside, his body shielded hers, his voice firm. "Get up," he ordered. "We fight together." Liara's chest burned as she forced herself to stand. Together, they fought back. His blade moved with precision, her claws with fury. For the first time, they were not just two fighters beside each other. They were one. His strikes flowed into hers. His defense covered her weakness. Her speed filled his gaps. The enemies began to falter under their combined force, but the trap was not finished. From above, heavy chains snapped, and a section of the ruin's ceiling collapsed. Stone blocks thundered down, the ground shaking with their weight. Liara gasped as a massive slab broke loose above her. She tried to dodge, but her legs were too slow. The stone came down with crushing force. In that moment, time seemed to freeze. David's eyes locked onto hers, steady and unshaken. Then he moved faster than she could believe. He slammed into her, shoving her clear of the falling stone. The slab crashed down where she had stood, the ground trembling beneath it. Dust filled the air, choking, blinding. When it cleared, Liara saw David pinned beneath the edge of the fallen stone. Her heart stopped. "David!" she shouted, rushing to his side. He grimaced, his face pale but calm. "You're safe," he whispered, his voice strained. Rage and fear tore through her chest. "No," she snarled, her claws digging into the stone. "Not like this." She pulled with all her strength, muscles screaming, claws cracking against rock. Her breath came in ragged gasps, but she did not stop. She would not lose him, not like she lost her partner. With a final roar, she lifted the slab just enough for him to crawl free. David dragged himself out, blood running down his arm. Liara collapsed beside him, chest heaving. For a long moment, they sat in the dust. Surrounded by the silence of the ruins, Liara's hands shook as she stared at him. Her heart was torn between hatred and something else. Something terrifying. He had saved her again, risked his life again. And this time, she could not deny the truth. Without him, she would be dead. David looked at her with those calm eyes. The same eyes she once hated. But now they felt different. Not weakness, not arrogance, just unshakable strength. Liara's chest ached, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Why? Why do you keep saving me?" He gave no speech, no grand answer, only 4 simple words. "Because I won't lose you." Her breath caught. For the first time, she had no anger left to throw at him, only silence, heavy and trembling. The ruins had been a trap meant to kill them both, but instead it had shattered something else. The last wall around her heart. The ruins still haunted Liara. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the stone falling, the dust rising, and David throwing himself into danger for her. The memory burned in her mind, not as anger, but as something she didn't want to name. It frightened her more than the battlefield ever could. Back at the outpost, healers worked on David's wounds. Liara stood outside the tent, her claws restless. She told herself she should not care. that a human's pain was nothing to her, but her legs would not move away. She waited silent until the healer finally emerged and said, "He will live." Relief washed through her, sharp and unwanted. She hated that her heart eased at those words, hated that her chest felt lighter, knowing he would rise again. When she stepped inside the tent, she found him sitting on the cot, his arm bandaged, his face pale but calm. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, silence stretched between them. "You are a fool," she said at last, her voice trembling with more than anger. David gave a faint smile, tired but steady. "Maybe," he admitted, "but you're alive." Liara's claws tightened against her palms. Her heart wanted to roar at him to demand why he kept doing this, but instead she whispered almost against her will, Why do you keep saving me, when I give you nothing but hate?" David lowered his gaze, his hands tightening around the edge of the cot. For a long moment he said nothing. Then his voice came low, heavy. "Because I know what it means to lose someone." Liara's chest tightened, her breath catching. She had expected him to speak of duty, of orders, maybe even pity, but not this. He raised his eyes to hers, and for the first time she saw something deeper, something broken. "I had a family once," he said quietly. "A wife, a daughter. They didn't survive the invasion." Liara froze, her claws falling. Limp at her sides, she stared at him, her heart hammering. A wife, a child. Taken by the same war that had taken her partner, she whispered, "You lost them." David nodded, his voice steady but rough. "Yes," he said, "and I swore I would never let anyone else die if I could stop it." The truth struck her harder than any enemy's blade. For the first time she saw him not as her unwanted replacement, not as the human she hated, but as someone carrying the same shadow she carried, loss, grief, an emptiness that could never be filled. Her anger cracked, and in its place, something fragile grew. "I thought humans did not understand our pain," she whispered, her voice low. David shook his head slowly. "Pain does not care about species," he said. "It takes from everyone." His words lingered in the air, heavy and true. Liara turned away quickly, afraid he might see the tears burning at the edge of her eyes. She had sworn never to let anyone replace her partner, never to let her heart open again. But now, this human's truth pulled at the walls she had built that night she could not sleep. The whispers of the outpost felt louder, crueler. "They fight well together," some said. "Perhaps the human has replaced her lost one," others murmured. Liara's claws cut into her blanket. As anger surged, "No one replaces him," she told herself. "No one." Yet when she closed her eyes, she did not see her partner's face. She saw David's calm eyes, his wounded arm, his broken voice, speaking of his lost daughter. The next day, orders came again. Scouts had spotted enemy forces gathering near. The old riverbed Liara and David were sent to confirm. As they walked through the wild grass, the silence between them was different. It was not filled with hate, not filled with distrust. It was heavy with the weight of secrets shared. At the riverbed, they found proof. Enemy banners rising, soldiers gathering, weapons shining in the Yaimbidu sun. Liara's heart tensed as she crouched low, watching. David knelt beside her, his shoulder brushing against hers. For once, she did not pull away. For once, his presence did not feel like an insult. It felt steady. "We should return," he whispered. Liara nodded, her chest tight, but as they moved back through the tall grass, a sudden crack split the air. An enemy scout had spotted them. Arrows whistled through the sky. Liara ducked, claws flashing. David blocked another arrow with his shield, his body turning to protect her. Her anger exploded, but not at him. At the enemies who dared aim at him, her claws tore through the grass, striking the scout with a roar. Blood sprayed. Silence returned. When she turned back, David was still standing, unharmed. And in that moment, Liara realized something terrifying. Her fear was no longer about losing her partner's memory. It was about losing David. Back at the outpost, She stood alone under the stars. Her heart was heavy with truths she did not want to accept. She had hated him, pushed him away, cursed him. But now, after hearing his pain, after fighting by his side, she could no longer deny it. The cracks in her wall had become too deep, and through them something new was breaking free. The air was thick with smoke. Dark clouds rolled across the sky as the outpost prepared for war. Scouts reported enemy forces marching fast, stronger than anyone had expected. Liara stood on the wall, her claws gripping the stone. Her heart beat heavy, not only with the call of battle but with a fear she did not want to name. David stood a few steps away, adjusting his armor, his eyes calm as ever. Liara watched him in secret, her chest tightening. She remembered his words, "I won't lose you." She remembered the way he looked when he spoke of his daughter. For the first time, she realized she could not imagine this battlefield without him. The horns of war sounded. The enemy poured from the forest, rows of armored beasts, soldiers roaring with fury, banners snapping in the wind. The outpost shook as arrows darkened the sky. Liara leapt down into the courtyard, landing beside David. Their eyes met for a brief heartbeat. No words were needed. They were together. The gates crashed open and the battle began. Steel clashed against claw. Arrows hissed through the air. Screams rose and fell like thunder. Liara fought with wild power, her rage cutting through enemy lines. David stayed at her side, his blade striking with calm precision. Together they moved like fire and stone, unshakable, unbreakable. But the enemy was endless. Wave after wave struck, pushing them back. Soldiers fell around them. The outpost walls began to crumble. A commander roared orders for retreat, but Liara and David stood their ground. The enemy pushed hard toward the center where the last line of defense was forming. Suddenly, Liara saw it. An enemy captain breaking through the line, charging straight at her. His weapon was massive, glowing with strange energy. She raised her claws, but she was too slow. The blade swung toward her. At the last moment, David stepped in front, his shield taking the blow. The force slammed him to the ground, his shield shattered, blood spilling from his side. "David!" Liara screamed. Her heart cracked wide open, terror flooding her. Without thinking, she threw herself at the captain, her claws ripping through his armor with furious strength. Her roars shook the air as she tore him down. But when she turned back, David was still on the ground, his face pale, his breath weak. She fell beside him, her hands trembling. "Stay with me," she begged, her voice breaking. His lips curved into the faintest smile. "You're still alive," he whispered. Tears burned her eyes, her chest twisting in agony. "No," she snarled. "Don't you dare leave me too." But there was no time for grief. The enemy surged again, pressing hard toward them. Liara stood, her body shaking with rage. She planted herself over David, her claws dripping with blood, her eyes blazing. They would not take him. Not while she breathed. The battle around her blurred into chaos. She cut down anyone who came close, her movements wild and desperate. Every strike was fueled not by hate, but by fear of losing him. She had lost once before. She would not lose. Again, other soldiers rallied to her roar, forming a circle around the wounded. The outpost burned, the enemy pressed, but Liara refused to fall. Her claws were broken, her body bleeding, but still she fought. She fought until the horns of retreat finally sounded from the enemy lines, until the forest swallowed their banners, until silence fell over the ruined courtyard. Liara collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving. Her claws shook as she turned back to David. He was still breathing, but barely. Her heart ached with terror. The healers rushed to him, lifting him onto a stretcher. Liara followed close, refusing to let him out of her sight. As the night fell, the fires of the outpost smoldered. Survivors mourned, but Liara did not join them. She sat by David's side in the healer's tent, her claws gripping the edge of the bed. She had once hated him, once cursed him for standing where her partner once stood. But now she knew the truth. If she lost him, the shadow of loss would swallow her forever. She leaned close, her voice breaking into a whisper. "You can't leave me," she said. "Not you." For the first time, she did not fight the tears that slid down her cheeks. The last stand had nearly broken her, but it had also revealed the truth her heart had been hiding. She did not just fight beside David. She needed him. The tent was quiet. The war outside had ended 2 days ago. Smoke still rose from the outpost walls, but inside the healer's tent, all Liara could hear was the slow, steady rhythm of David's breath. He had survived, barely. His body was broken, but his spirit held on. Liara had not left his side, not once. She sat in silence, claws folded in her lap, watching over him like a guardian. Her armor was still stained with blood, but she didn't care. She had made a promise to herself. She would not lose him too. When his eyes finally opened, she was there. He blinked slowly, weak but alive. "Hey," he whispered, voice dry as dust. Liara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You're awake," she said softly. His smile was small, but it reached his eyes. "Did we win?" She laughed once, a rough, broken sound. "You nearly died," she said, brushing dust from his brow. David looked at her with those familiar, calm eyes. "But I didn't," he replied. Their gaze held, and something passed between them, unspoken, strong, unbreakable. Later, that day the council summoned her. They praised her bravery, honored her name, and offered her command of a new unit. But Liara stood still, her claws by her side. "I'll only accept if he's beside me," she said. Gasps filled the chamber, some shocked, some disapproving. A proud alien warrior requesting a human as her equal. Unheard of. But the council saw the truth in her eyes. She had once hated this man, this outsider. Now she chose him, not because of duty, but because of trust, because of something stronger than blood or history. When she returned to the tent, David sat up slowly, wincing in pain. "You're limping," he said, pointing at her bruised leg. "And you're breathing," she answered. "So I win." He chuckled weakly. "Guess we both did." They were given time to heal, not just their wounds, but the weight they carried, the ghosts of lost families, fallen friends, and bitter hate. Together, they trained. Again, walked again, learned how to laugh again. The whispers in the outposts slowly faded. No one dared call him a replacement anymore. He was no longer the human, he was her partner. One evening under the stars, Liara stood beside the same wall where she once stared in silence. David joined her, as he always did. She looked up at the sky, voice quiet. "I never thought I could fight beside anyone else after losing him." David didn't interrupt. "I thought letting someone in again would be a betrayal," she continued. "But it wasn't." David placed his hand on the stone wall, just beside hers. "It's not betrayal," he said softly. "It's survival." She turned to him, eyes shining. "No," she whispered. "It's more than survival now." There was silence for a moment, and then she added, "You made me feel alive again." David smiled, warm and gentle. "You never stopped being alive, Liara," he said. "You just forgot how to feel it, the boy." Next day, they stood before their new squad, mixed species, younger fighters, unsure and untested. David and Liara gave the same speech side by side. "No matter what you are," she said, "alien or human, you bleed the same in war, and you heal the same in peace." David added, "They weren't just leaders. They were proof that enemies could become partners, that grief could turn into strength, and that hate could be melted by courage and trust." As weeks passed, the war moved farther away. Peace slowly returned. David and Liara were finally given leave. Time to rest. Time to live. They chose to leave the outpost together, not as soldier and human, not as commander and protector, but as something new. They traveled to the mountains where Liara's partner had once dreamed of building a home. She planted a tree in his memory. David stood beside her, not trying to replace him, just holding space for her pain and healing. And when she looked at him, really looked, she no longer saw the human she hated. She saw the one who saved her life. who carried her grief without judgment, who taught her how to live again. That night, by the fire, she leaned her head on his shoulder. The stars above were quiet, and for once so was her heart. "Do you think we'll ever stop fighting?" she asked. David looked at the flames, then at her. "Maybe," he said. "But even if we don't, we won't fight alone." And that was enough. Because in a galaxy filled with war, she had found something rare, not just a soldier, not just a partner, but a new beginning.